go with the human ear. I'm not going to write a title down because I need the space to do the picture that we're going to draw, the diagram. So if you want to title it the human ear, go right ahead. The ear is actually a fairly complicated structure. So I think what I will do is I will draw the ear sort of in this purple color, the main idea of the main structures, and I'll highlight with different colors, different structures. So the first one, I'm going to start a little bit lower because there's some stuff that has to go on the top of the diagram. So let me start about here. And here is the sort of ear on the side of your head, right? So you can draw along with me. It's very important that you draw the picture because it helps your brain in remembering and focusing on everything. We have this little whirly thing here, all the little folds in the ear, right? The ear has funny little twists and turns in it. Those, of course, have developed over time through evolution as the most effective way of focusing the sound waves into the ear. That's what this particular part of the ear does. What we'll do is we'll draw, and then we'll label it all after. How's that? Now the ear is attached to the head, but there is a hole that goes into your head from your ear. We all know that. And then there's, maybe I'll use a blue color for this piece. There's a little membrane that's stretched across the hole and seals off whatever's inside from the outside world. This, of course, is the eardrum. We'll get to that in a minute. Then, what happens is the ear sort of opens up on the other side of the eardrum into a space. And this space is where the first bit of action sort of happens. This is a long tube that stretches down to your throat, actually. It connects to the back of your throat. Your ears, your nose, your eyes, and your mouth are all connected in the throat. Then over here, there is sort of another structure, which I'm going to change colors so we can see this structure. Actually, before I do that, let's draw the little bones. There are 3 little bones in the ear, and they're sort of attached to the eardrum. One of them sort of slides up and has a little knob on the end. Looks like that. These bones are incredibly tiny, and we're not drawing them to scale because it would be too small in the picture, so we're drawing them larger, but that's okay. The other one sort of loops down like this. This is a very generalized idea, as long as we understand how they work. And then this one is attached to one that sort of has a U shape, like a horseshoe, or like the stirrup on a saddle that you put your foot in. That's what it's actually called, the stirrup. And these bones are gently connected to each other. I drew a little space between them so we would be able to see them, that's all. Okay, so far you've got this nice picture. Let's continue with a slightly different color because this structure I'm about to draw is a little bit different. I'm just going to draw a little line like this, and around like this, and then over here I'm going to swing up and make a big seashell shape. And then, this is the hard part to draw. We're going to draw 3 little loops on the top of this seashell, something like this. Okay, so we're going to go up and around like this, a little blob there. Okay, then we're going to start. I'll let you catch up to me, make sure everybody's with me because this gets complicated. Then what we're going to do is we're going to start about here, and we're going to go around like this, and just sort of meet up there with that. Then we're going to slide underneath this one and make a loop that goes sort of around like this, like that. And then we can finish off the other one sort of like this, and around like that. So we have two little loops. And then the last part of this is going to sort of come from here and go around like this and sort of back like this. And this is also a loop, but it's a sideways loop, so it's harder to get the effect. So in a sense, what we have here are three little loops. And the idea is that one of the loops is on the plane of the board. The other is a loop sort of twisted the other way, and then one is twisted in the third direction. So we've got the X, Y, Z axes on these loops. Okay, that's good. We're pretty much done. Let's just join up our little pieces here like this, so everything looks connected. There. Well, what else do we have to draw? I think we can start our labels. I think we're pretty good. So let's start with some black here. Let's label the pieces of the ear. What we have on the outside is the pinna. Pinna. And it, of course, is the part of the ear that allows us to focus the sound. It's the part of the ear we see. This is what we call ears, because we don't see all this internal stuff. So, you know, in fact, the pinna isn't the ear at all. It's a focuser. The sound waves, the waves of sound that come towards the ear, the pressure waves, compression, rarefaction, compression, rarefaction, these pressure waves are moving into the ear, and the pinna focuses them into the ear canal and allows us. You don't have to draw the little waves and things. I'm going to be explaining, but rather than just me talk to you, I'm going to draw little things to help you visualize what I'm saying, but you don't need to put those on your picture. Okay, so the sound waves are going to go in, and of course they would go into here and be focused by this weird shaped cartilaginous lumpy thing that we call the pinna, or the ear on the outside of the head. This tube has a name. Let's see where I can write that. It's called the auditory canal. So that would be the space right here. And then, of course, we hit the eardrum. So this blue thing is called the eardrum. Now, some of the parts of the ear have Latin names and English names. So I'm gonna write them both. I don't really care which one you use, because this is physics. We want to understand how the ear works. If you want to memorize the Latin names, go ahead. If you want to memorize the English names, go ahead. This little blue guy, let's go down here and write the eardrum. Or the Latin name, which I'll slide in brackets under here, is the Tim, T-Y-M, Panum, P-A-N-U-M. That's Latin for drum, the tympanum. There it is there, the blue thing. This tube that we've drawn is the Eustachian tube. Eustachian tube. That leads to the throat. You might want to put a little arrow there and put to the throat or something if you want. I won't do it on my picture because it'll mess it up and there's not much room. There you go, the Eustachian tube. Now we have these three little bones, and we have to label them carefully. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take the top one here and just kind of go like this down over here. And then the second one I'll slide over here and stick in here. And then the last one here I'll slide way down over here and just kind of do it like that. Fortunately, it's a little bit tight. These three bones are named. We'll start with the bottom one because it's the one that comes first in order. It's called the hammer. The hammer. Or if you like Latin, it's called the malleus. Okay, and just to avoid, I'm going to stretch this line out because I don't want to squeeze everything in and make it look crazy. So I'll put this guy sort of more over here. Okay, The second guy is called the anvil. An anvil is that crazy little thing, that black thing that blacksmiths bang on, you know, when they're making their horseshoes. And because this hammer is basically touching the anvil, and as we'll see, bangs on it. That's how it gets its name. So we have the hammer, and then we have the malleus. Now this is the anvil, and let's see, its Latin name is the incus. Incus. And then the last little bone is called the stirrup. Remember I told you it's shaped like the stirrup of a horse saddle, where you put your foot. Or in Latin it's called the stapes. Stapes. Okay. Lastly, two more things. We have this big seashell-shaped guy here, which is called the cochlea, which is Latin for shell. And then we have these weird guys at the top. There's three of them, and they're all sort of the same. So I'll just put an arrow coming from them like this. Actually, we're doing it backwards. I'll put the arrow pointing to it, because that's how we've done all the rest. These are called the semicircular let me fix that for you. Semicircular canals. And this part of the ear is what makes up what we call the balance organ. Or sometimes it's called the equilibrium organ. Equilibrium and balance kind of mean the same thing. And what's interesting is it has really nothing to do with hearing. It just has happened to evolve along with all the other pieces in this spot. And that big green shape you see there has evolved to perform two functions, one of which has to do with hearing, that's the cochlea part, and then this top piece, which is also evolved out of the same structure, has a completely different function from hearing, but it's part of the deal, so we'll just kind of draw attention to it. So there is a picture of the ear. Now, another thing that you should understand is that the cochlea is filled with a kind of fluid. Let me see here if I can do crayon, maybe some blue. Inside this cochlea, there is fluid, watery fluid. So I'm just going to shade it like this to kind of give us the impression that there's watery fluid. And this fluid is also up here through the semicircular canals, three of them, and all inside this area. Oh, and there's also another membrane, a membranous window, which I'll draw right here on the cochlea. All of this, of course, is embedded in bones in our head. So let's see if we can't also shade, maybe in purple. This is all bones. All this area here, all around here. It's the bones of the skull, right? So all of this is skull. All around the outside, sort of. All in here and around. Oh yeah, I just realized there's one more piece of the puzzle. I'll go back to my green color. Pen. Right here at the back of the cochlea, there's a extension in the bone that becomes what's called the auditory nerve. Let's see if I can squeeze that in here. Auditory nerve. The nerve is actually inside this bony cavity, but go back to the bones, and there we go. So there's the ear. Okay. So how does it work? So we were talking before about the pinna. The vibrations enter the ear through the pinna, focused by the pinna. It might be a good idea for you to write each part in a list underneath. And as I talk about them, you can make a sentence or two to describe what they do. So go under your picture, write down pinna, focuses sound. The pinna. I don't want to do it because if I do, I'm going to have to keep moving my picture up and down, and that's crazy. So the pinna focuses the sound into the auditory canal. The auditory canal is basically just an opening, so there's really nothing to say about that. It's interesting though, it does have cells in it that secrete earwax. And what happens is the cells secrete this earwax in order to trap dirt and germs and things that you don't want in your ear. And then the cells also have tiny cilia that push the earwax slowly out of your ear, continuously. So in a healthy ear, you produce little bits of wax. Remember, this is all microscopic, right? We're trapping microscopic dirt and germs. So you produce tiny little bits of wax, and the cilia move that wax constantly to the outside of the ear, where it either falls out unnoticed to you because it's microscopic, or it even dries up and crumbles and turns to powder and dust and disappears and whatever. So our ears actually clean themselves. If you leave them alone, they will just do their own great job of cleaning themselves. But if your ear is unhealthy, you have an infection, you'll end up with big, large clumps of wax that ooze out of the ear and are gooey, and we don't want that. A lot of people like to stick Q-tips in their ear because they think if they stick in the Q-tip, then they can clean the ear out. But in fact, they're doing the opposite. If you stick a Q-tip in your ear, watch what happens. I'll take some green here to show you the wax. If you stick a Q-tip in the ear, here's your Q-tip with a big cotton ball on the end, then what you do is you push the wax all in here and you build it up. Don't draw this on your picture. You build up a big block of wax that's not supposed to be there, and this can actually plug your ear and make you hard of hearing, and you have to flush it out with fluid. The best way to clean your ear is to flush it with liquid, not by sticking a Q-tip inside. But the best way to clean an ear, even better than that, is don't touch it. Stay out of your ear. If you hit the eardrum with your Q-tip, it really hurts. And you could end up with a damaged eardrum, which is not a good idea because the eardrum is the next piece of our puzzle. And it is the thing that allows us to take the pressure waves in the air and turn them into mechanical waves in the bones. So these little waves that I've drawn here on the side, over here, entering the ear, moving in this way, following the canal, cause the eardrum to sort of vibrate back and forth like this. It wiggles like a drum skin, and it wiggles with the exact same pattern that the incoming waves have. When that happens, it hits this first bone, the hammer, causing that to wiggle. And now the hammer wiggles and taps against the anvil, the next bone, which then wiggles and taps against the stirrup. So these three bones are all shaking back and forth as the sound comes through. Again, don't mess up your picture. You can just envision that. The bones rattle back and forth, clacking against each other. In doing so, they serve a couple of purposes. First of all, they transmit the sound, and they turn it from a sound wave in the air into a wave of vibrating bones. So it's a different form of wave now. And they also serve to amplify the sound. So you can write underneath your picture the three bones, the hammer, the anvil, and the stirrup. They all have the same function, basically. So you can say that they change the wave, the pressure wave, into a mechanical wave of vibrating bones, and they serve to amplify the signal to allow us to get a little bit more juice, a little bit more volume out of the signal. And they do that through a complicated sort of resonance where they get kind of clacking along together, and it's almost like they get in the groove, so to speak. We'll talk more about resonance later and how that works. But they bounce back and forth. Okay, so now the stapes is banging against this other membrane, which is sometimes called the cochlear membrane, I think. We're not going to label it because we don't have any room. But it taps on the edge of the cochlea. So here we are right here, tapping, tapping, tapping on this membrane, which is just like the eardrum. So it pushes back and forth and in and out, and it vibrates like this. And then what happens, of course, is it creates pressure waves in the fluid inside the cochlea, compressions and rarefactions that travel all through the fluid. Okay? Now I should maybe draw a line right across here. I'm going to fix that like that. I don't want you to think that the equilibrium organ is going to be connected to this. So it's not feeling these vibrations. It's got its own issues, and we'll talk about it later. So let's block it off completely like that with a line right across there. Nice thick line. So you see what's happening is the blue waves now are moving through the cochlea. And so now we're back to a pressure wave, but this time it's not a pressure wave in the air, it's a pressure wave in the cochlear fluid. Okay, we're almost done. To figure out what happens here, we have to draw another small picture, because we have to draw a picture of what happens microscopically. So what we're going to do is we're going to take a section of the cochlea, maybe this section right here, and we're going to blow this up down below in a microscopic view. Okay, so that green line is actually, so what I'll do is like this, I'll draw the edge of the cochlea there, and we're taking this little piece right here, and we're going, we're making like a microscopic blow up. Here's what you would see under the microscope. Instead of a little green line, you would see a whole bunch of green cells lined up along the inside of the cochlea. And these green cells, we'll put little nuclei inside. What happened to this guy? He's weird. There we go. These cells are interesting because they have a very unique feature. They have a feature that sticks out of them, like this. Looks like a flagella on a euglena or a paramecium or something like that. But it's actually an extension of the cell membrane. But what it is that there's different lengths. There are short ones, and some of them get longer. I think the short ones are closest, and then you get longer and longer as you go. Now, there are many of these cells. Obviously, if you think about lining this entire cochlea, there'd be thousands and thousands and thousands, if not millions of these cells. I'm not sure what the actual number is. So in between the cells, of course, don't forget, there is the fluid. If I use my crayon here, go blue, there's fluid in here inside the cochlea. So these little cells are just kind of bathing in this fluid, these little hairs. And that's what they're called. They're actually called hair cells because they look like hair, but they're not hair. They're not hair like on your head. They look kind of like that. And what's interesting is that, don't forget, in this fluid, we have pressure waves happening because the stapes was tapping on the cochlear membrane, and it was making these little pressure waves inside this fluid. So the pressure waves come in, and guess what? They start to cause the hair cells to sway back and forth. However, different frequencies of waves, you might want to write this down. The longer the hair is on the hair cell, the lower the frequency it swings to. So what we have is we have many hair cells with different lengths of hairs. Different lengths of hairs. Each tuned, well, we use the word tuned, to a particular frequency. So they only wiggle when their particular frequency, oh boy, let's spell that right. They only wiggle when their particular frequency of wave is present. Right? The short ones, high frequencies, and the longer ones, lower frequencies. And then each of these is attached. I just realized that I wrote in the spot I'm going to have to draw in. So that was kind of silly. Maybe I can squeeze it up above. These are attached to nerves. These cells are part of the nervous system. And they make a thick nerve that comes up. I'll just go up over top here. And this is the auditory nerve that we had talked about in the other picture. Auditory nerve. So if I go back up to the other picture, we're talking about this part right up here. So all of these are all connected, all from all around the cochlea. These nerves come in and all join up here. And that's how, of course, the signals get to the brain. So what happens is let's go back down. The hair cells get vibrated by different frequencies of sound, and they each send a signal when they're vibrated to the brain. And the brain then can interpret that, and the brain can say, oh, I can tell when there's high sounds, when there's low sounds, and basically the brain can create the entire concept of sound that we imagine in our heads when we listen to things. Because remember, it is the brain that actually hears. The ear gives it information about pressure waves, but the brain somehow puts it together to create the entire phenomenon of what sound is to human beings. So our brain is a big part of it, right? This is just the input. The processing part happens in the brain. And to be honest, we really don't know how that happens. We don't know how the brain puts it all together and creates the complexities of what we hear as sound. But we do know that it can distinguish between the different frequencies of sound because of these hair cells that wiggle. And that's basically how the ear works. So let's do a quick review. We'll go back. You have pressure waves in the air. They enter through the pinna. They're focused into the auditory canal. They hit the eardrum, causing it to wiggle. The eardrum then wiggles against the hammer, which wiggles against the anvil, which wiggles against the stirrup. These bones amplify the sound, and then what happens is the stirrup taps against the cochlear membrane and creates a new kind of pressure wave. Now remember, each pressure wave that's being created is exactly the same pattern as the original wave in the air. The pattern is continued throughout the whole thing. And then you get to the cochlea, where the waves go through, and as we have in our picture, we see how they vibrate the hair cells, and high frequencies vibrate the high ones. So, you know, when there's a high frequency sound, this one would send a message. It's a complicated sort of cellular biology thing where the wiggling of the hair creates what's called a depolarization in the membrane. Some of you will learn about that in biology. A depolarization in the membrane which travels along the membrane and down through the nerve and sends it to the brain. So the brain, if the brain hears this signal, oh, then I know that that's a high frequency sound. However, if it happens to be this guy who wiggles and he gets depolarized, he'll send a signal and the brain can say, oh, lower frequency, longer hair. You can only imagine how many wires there would be in this. If you were building this out of wires, you've got 25,000 different cells in there. So you'd have to have a wire from each one so the brain could tell which cells were vibrating, or at least a wire from each small group of cells. You'd need thousands of wires to make this. It's very complicated. Biology is awesome, and we can't come even close to this. But actually we can, I shouldn't say that, because we have developed microchips. We now have actual cochlear implants, which are artificial versions of this. They don't work nearly as well as the ear, but for someone who's deaf, because this didn't form properly at birth, or because they damaged this could help them actually hear at least some kind of sound. Maybe not as clearly and as nicely as we hear it, but it could help. Okay, that leaves us with these weird little balance organs at the top. That's the hearing. Everything we've talked about is hearing. Now let's go and look at these fellas up here, these semicircular canals and what they're for, that happen to be resting on top of the cochlea. Well, let me go down here, and again, we'll draw another picture. Okay, so if you want, you can just title this balance organ. Let's use the word equilibrium, and then we'll call it balance in brackets, balance organ. Awesome. So basically what we have are three canals. So I'm just going to quickly draw them again. And I have to make sure I draw them correctly. So we'll go up like this. Actually, let me redraw that one. Sorry. I'm drawing it too much in the wrong plane for you to visualize it. So I will try again. Let me draw it more like this. More like that. This one looping around. More like that. Okay, and then the last one sort of just over like this with a little line, because you can't even, it's sideways, so you can't even see the loop. So imagine that you have this one in red, sort of on the y-axis of your head. Then the one over here that I'm pointing to in blue is sort of like the x-axis. And this last one, this weird one in purple, is the z-axis, which is pointing out of the board towards you. I can't draw that very well, but the 3D effect, right? So purple is pointing straight towards you. So what this means is you have a tube sort of looping in each of these ways. The red one would loop sort of up. Whoops, that's not red. The red one would loop sort of up. If I follow my finger up towards you, then out towards you at the top, loop back down and up and loop. So it's hard for me to show you that, but it's kind of looping in a way that was towards you at the top and away from you at the bottom. The X one is looping this way, which is on the board. That one's easy to draw. And then the green one is looping sort of sideways, but it's also looping over like this, and then out towards you, and then back, and then again out towards you, in on the other side and back. You kind of get the way those three little loops would work. Inside there is the fluid. Let me draw the fluid. Inside of these semicircular canals, fluid. There's also something else inside here. Little crystals of I'm not sure what they are. They're probably calcium of some sort. And these little crystals are like little rocks. They're very small. Okay? Put some rocks in there. So here's what happens. When you tilt your head, I'm going to erase this. If you tilt one of these tubes, then the fluid washes around inside the tube. So let's see what happens if we tilt our head this way. It's the easiest one to draw. Okay? So what I'm going to do is I'm going to draw this blue loop only. So we can just focus on the blue loop only. Okay? So it's the loop that's going around like this. Sort of like that, and it attaches into the other one over here. Okay. So if you tilt your head, this little loop would twist, and the rocks would then have to fall or move. They would always be sort of settled on one spot. But as soon as you twist your head, the little rocks would twist around with it, and the fluid would slosh through the tube. And the movement of the fluid and those little rocks causes the hair cells inside here, I'll just draw little hairs, sort of the same kind of cells as in the cochlea, that's why it's all the same structure, but with a different job to do. These hair cells also wiggle and move, but it's the rocks that push and wiggle them around which tell us that our head has turned. So if you tilt your head, this kind of tilt on this picture would be like putting your head against one shoulder and then bobbing it over to the other shoulder, back and forth. And that would be having these little rocks move around in there, and that sends a message when they wiggle into the hairs that, hey, my head is moving in this direction. And likewise, if you tilt your head sort of chin to chest, and then up and down, looking straight up and down, as if you were saying hi, yes, as if you were nodding yes, the same thing would happen in this red little guy here. Those little rocks would slosh around and move the hairs and tell your brain that your head is moving. And if you turn your head from side to side, as if you're saying no, then in this purple one, you'd have the same thing happening. So your brain can get a message that says your head is being moved from side to side, up and down, or shoulder to shoulder in the three different directions. More importantly, even if you don't move your head, well, you can just tilt your head over and hold it there. Tilt your head over to your left shoulder and hold it there. And the rocks will slide around to a different spot. They'll move the hairs, and as long as they don't move, your brain knows that your head is now in a tilted position. So this allows you to figure out what orientation your head is in. That's critically important, because obviously we need to know if we're right side up or upside down, or how we're looking at the world. And that's what this organ does. People who suffer from vertigo, where they get dizzy and sickness, is often related to this organ not functioning properly. We're not 100% sure what actually causes it. Some believe it's viral. A virus can cause an infection that clogs up this fluid, and this fluid then doesn't flow properly. It might be, or it might be also a condition that actually happens deep in the brain with the processing of the signals. It's very difficult to tell. When you get motion sickness, when you spin around too much, this organ is what causes you to get very sick. Sometimes you'll vomit, you'll get ill because of the fact that the fluid gets spinning so much that it confuses the brain, and the brain says, well, this can't be good for us. We're not designed for this kind of motion. So when you go on the zipper, or you go on the freak out at the fair, you know, and you're spinning around and around and around, your brain says, no, we weren't designed for this, so let's quit. And, you know, it makes you feel sick, because in the natural world, one of the things that might make you dizzy is a poison or a toxin that you've ingested, a bad mushroom or something. And so vomiting is a good response to clear your stomach of whatever toxin you may have taken in. So there you go. That's the picture of the ear and basically how it works. If you want to look at the pictures in the textbook, you can. I suggest you go online and just Google the ear. You'll get some really good pictures and actual pictures that are more accurate than this one. But give it a Google and check out some of the pieces and parts, and you'll be able to reinforce what we've learned here. And I think we'll talk another day about some of, well, why don't we do it right now really quickly? We have a few minutes. Some of the things that can go wrong with the ear. If you cut off your pinna, if your ear gets sliced off, like Van Gogh, the artist, cut off his ear apparently and mailed it to his girlfriend. He was kind of a wacky guy. Probably a ring would have been better, but hey, if you don't have a ring, I can't afford it, I'm a struggling artist, here's an ear, just as good. I love you. Anyway, if you cut that off, remarkably, it wouldn't have a major effect on your hearing at all, because the hole, the pinna, would be gone, but the hole would still be here. You'd have less focused sound. The sound might not be as loud. You know, it would be not as efficient, but you could still hear pretty well, because the pressure waves would still make their way into this auditory canal. If the eardrum were damaged, you jabbed a Q-tip in there and ripped a hole in your eardrum. That's serious, because that's where it all starts. That's the key thing that turns the pressure waves in the air into the mechanical waves to travel through to the cochlea. So a damaged eardrum means serious hearing issues. Eardrums can heal. They can heal themselves to some degree if they're not too badly damaged. And in fact, we even poke little holes in them to put tubes in your ears when you're a kid. If you have an infection, the space around the 3 red bones fills up with thick, gooey mucus, and it won't drain properly. It's supposed to drain down the eustachian tube. The mucus drains out this way. But if this tube is very thin, and it can't drain properly, you cut a little hole in the eardrum, you put a tiny tube in there. It's very small, it's tiny. It's so small you could barely even see it. And it allows the mucus to drain out into the ear and out so that the pressure doesn't build up and you don't have an earache. So, and then what happens after a year or two is the tube just pops out. It just falls out into the ear and it disappears. You probably don't even know you lost it. And the eardrum heals up just fine. So it can heal to some degree, but major damage would be huge. If you smash the little bones in your ear, that's a problem. And if you damage the cochlea in any way, of course. Congenital hearing problems, people who are born deaf or born with hearing issues, usually it's because some of these structures haven't formed properly, in particular the cochlea and the hair cells and the nerves that go to the brain are not properly formed. Another interesting thing is when you go to a loud concert, have you ever noticed that you go there and it's loud at first, but then after a while you tend to get used to it. But when you come out, for about half an hour, everybody's yelling because your ears don't seem to work as well. It's almost like you went deaf for a part of the time. It takes about a half an hour for your hearing to come back. That's because there are muscles that surround these bones. I'll just kind of put in blue here. There are muscles attached to them. And so when you hear a loud sound, these muscles tighten up and prevent these bones from rattling too much, because loud sounds make them rattle so much they could break. So these muscles hold on tight, and it acts like a suppressor. It kind of like it holds them from vibrating too much, which means the sound is not as loud. It's quieter. But if it's a very loud sound already, that's why they do it. It's like protection. So it minimizes the amount of vibration for loud, loud, loud sounds. When you come out of the concert, though, these muscles are still tight, and it takes about half an hour for them to relax and let loose again. And that's when your hearing starts to come back and you can hear normally again. So that's what's happening there. It's actually a safety mechanism to prevent you from damaging these precious little bones, which are so tiny that you could fit 6 of them on your baby finger. They're just on your baby fingernail, I mean. They're very tiny. And they're sensitive. Remember, the ear is extremely sensitive, right? Those hair cells are extremely sensitive. What happens to people like me, and you perhaps when you're older, is when you go, the pressure waves from loud sounds, even with those muscles, the cochlea can end up with very, very strong pressure waves inside of it. And what that does is it can cause these hairs to break, and they won't work anymore. And if they don't work anymore, they break or they bend or they get wrecked, then you can't hear that signal. Now you have thousands and thousands and thousands of these cells, so you can damage quite a few before it's noticeable. And usually the short ones are the ones that get damaged first. That's why when we did the sound test with the frequencies, I couldn't hear anything above over, what was it, 17, 18,000 hertz, because in my lifetime I've damaged some of these small hairs. But you young people who haven't done so could hear right up to 20,000, no problem. When you get to be my age, you may have issues with that. If you damage too many of these hairs, then your hearing begins to go. And typically you start to lose the highest ones first, and then if you lose too many, you have difficulty hearing altogether. So very loud sounds produce very loud pressure waves in the ear, especially in the cochlea. And even though the 3 bones can work, the muscles can squeeze them to help you, that's only helping a little bit. And if you're sitting at a rock concert, you're going to break these hairs, and you're going to have hearing loss over time building up. Okay, so there you have it, the ear. I think that's all I will say, and we will talk more about some of the issues and things that happen with the ear and how we perceive sound later on. So we're good to go.